Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and realize that every thought you've had for the past decade wasn't yours. They don't warn you when your mind gets hijacked. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, subtle, silent. They tell you to think positive, to be grateful, to accept yourself. And every time you do, a piece of your mental sovereignty dies. You weren't trained to control your thoughts. You were trained to be controlled by them. Trained to react to every stimulus, trained to chase every distraction, trained to feel guilty for wanting mental discipline. But here's what they never taught you. The man who cannot control his own mind will be controlled by everything else. This world doesn't reward mental clarity. It doesn't honor focus. It studies your attention, fragments it, weaponizes it against you. Because power doesn't come from having thoughts. It comes from choosing which thoughts deserve your energy. Silence, stillness, discipline. That's what creates unbreakable minds. Not reaction, not explanation, not the constant mental noise they've convinced you is normal. When you stop leaking mental energy to every random thought, you start becoming someone they can't reach, someone they can't control. This is not inspiration. This is mental warfare. Psychological resistance against everything inside you that was designed to keep your consciousness manageable. Your mind has become a rental property where you pay the bills, but don't own the deed. Every impulse that made you anxious when you should have been calm, every reaction that exposed your mental weakness, every thought that pulled you away from your center, that's not you. That's the programming. From now on, we don't think to feel better. We think with precision. We don't chase peace of mind. We become the storm that silences everything around us. This is mental domination, and this isn't the beginning of your journey. It's the end of your mental slavery. But before we dive deeper into this psychological revolution, I need you to do something that separates the serious from the curious. If this message is hitting different, if you feel that shift cracking through your old mental patterns right now, hit that subscribe button. Lock it in. That's your first act of mental discipline. Because what I'm about to reveal next will only make sense to those ready to take their mind back. Subscribe now, because once you see how deep this mental control goes, there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. You're not here to have a peaceful mind. You're not here to think positive thoughts. You're here to become dangerous in a world that only respects mental control. If you feel that recognition burning through your consciousness right now, comment this: I wasn't built to be controlled. I was built to control. Write it. Lock it in. That's the first declaration of war against the forces occupying your mental space. Consider this paradox. If your mind is truly yours, why can't you stop it from wandering during meditation? Why can't you silence the internal critic that tears you apart? Why can't you eliminate the anxiety that haunts your quiet moments? Why can't you choose to be happy, to be confident, to be at peace? If you're the master of your own consciousness, why does it feel like you're constantly fighting a war against your own thoughts? The answer is simple and devastating. You're not fighting your thoughts. You're fighting someone else's thoughts that have taken up residence in your head. You're battling programming that was installed before you were old enough to question it, reinforced by every interaction, every piece of media consumed, every social expectation absorbed. And here's what makes it even more sinister. The system that controls your mind has convinced you that this mental chaos is natural, that the constant stream of worry, comparison, self-doubt, and distraction is just being human. That you should accept the noise because that's just how minds work. But it's not. Your mind in its natural state is not a battlefield. It's not a chattering monkey. It's not a prison of perpetual dissatisfaction. Your mind, when truly under your control, becomes the most powerful weapon in your reality. It becomes a tool of precision, a source of unshakable inner authority. Every morning you wake up and immediately surrender your consciousness to the programs. You check your phone, flooding your neural pathways with someone else's agenda. You replay conversations, letting phantom voices argue in your head. You worry about futures that may never come, letting fear colonize your present moment. You judge yourself through eyes that were never meant to see you. This is not weakness. This is the result of living in a world that profits from your mental confusion, that thrives on your psychological dependency. that needs your mind to be scattered, reactive, and controllable. Because a man who truly controls his own mind cannot be manipulated. He cannot be sold to. He cannot be frightened into compliance. But here's the question that changes everything. What would happen if you could take your mind back? What would your life look like if every thought served your highest purpose? What kind of power would you wield if your consciousness became a fortress instead of a refugee camp? The answer to these questions lies ahead, buried beneath layers of conditioning so deep that most people live and die without ever suspecting they exist. But once you see the mechanisms of mental control, once you understand how your consciousness was hijacked and by whom, you can begin the process of reclaiming what was always yours. The war for your mind has already been fought, and you lost without ever knowing you were under attack. But the war isn't over. It's just beginning. They never tell you the real reason why your mind feels like a prison. They blame stress, genetics, modern life, social media. But that's surface noise. The real invasion happened centuries ago, and it's been perfected with surgical precision. What you're experiencing isn't a personal failing. It's the result of a psychological architecture designed to fragment human consciousness and keep it fragmented. Carl Jung saw it first. He called it the collective unconscious. But what he was really describing was mass mental programming. Jung realized that beneath your personal thoughts lies a deeper layer of inherited psychological patterns, archetypes, and conditioning that you never chose but that shape every decision you make. You think you're thinking your own thoughts, but you're actually running code written by dead men's fears, dead civilizations' limitations, dead systems' need for control. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this too. He wrote about the slave mentality, not just as a social phenomenon, but as a psychological virus that convinces individuals to surrender their mental authority to external systems. Nietzsche saw that most people live their entire lives thinking other people's thoughts, feeling other people's emotions, pursuing other people's definitions of success and happiness. They become what he called the last men, beings who have forgotten how to create their own values, their own thoughts, their own reality. But here's where it gets darker. Arthur Schopenhauer revealed that what you call your will, your desires, your motivations, your drive to live, isn't even yours. It's a blind force that uses your consciousness as a vehicle for its own agenda. You think you want things, but what you really want is what the species needs you to want to survive and reproduce. Your mind has been hijacked not just by society, but by biology itself. This is why meditation feels so difficult. This is why focus seems impossible. This is why peace of mind feels like chasing smoke. You're not just fighting your personal thoughts. You're fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that was designed to keep you paranoid, reactive, and scanning for threats. You're fighting cultural conditioning that profits from your mental chaos. You're fighting psychological systems that need you to be predictable, controllable, and dependent. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the concentration camps. He realized that the only thing that could not be taken from a man was his ability to choose his response to any situation. But even Frankl knew that most people surrender this final freedom voluntarily. They let circumstances control their inner state. They let other people's opinions determine their self-worth. They let past experiences dictate their future possibilities. The modern world has turned this psychological surrender into an art form. Every notification on your phone is a tiny invasion of your mental space. Every advertisement is a neural hack designed to create desire where none existed. Every piece of news is engineered to trigger specific emotional responses that keep you engaged, afraid, and mentally scattered. Jean-Paul Sartre understood that humans are condemned to be free, but most people experience this freedom as a burden too heavy to carry. So they surrender their consciousness to systems, ideologies, social expectations, and cultural narratives that tell them who to be, what to think, how to feel. They trade the terrifying responsibility of mental sovereignty for the comfortable prison of mental conformity. But here's what none of these philosophers fully grasped. The system isn't just external, it's internal. The enemy isn't just society or biology or evolution. The enemy is the part of your mind that has learned to collaborate with its own oppression. There's a voice in your head right now that defends your mental chains, that argues for your limitations, that convinces you that mental control is impossible or dangerous or selfish. This internal collaborator is what makes mental slavery so insidious. It makes you complicit in your own psychological imprisonment. It whispers that you need the mental noise because without it, you'd be empty. It suggests that constant thinking means you're intelligent, that emotional reactivity means you're sensitive, that mental chaos means you're complex and interesting. Aldous Huxley saw this coming. In Brave New World, he didn't just predict external control through technology and drugs. He predicted internal control through conditioning so complete that people would love their servitude, defend their mental chains, and attack anyone who suggested they could be free. The psychological establishment has become part of this system. They've convinced you that mental suffering is normal, that peace of mind requires years of therapy, that controlling your thoughts is impossible or unhealthy. They've medicalized what should be disciplined, pathologized what should be mastered, and convinced you that your mind is a medical condition instead of a tool to be sharpened. This is why most people live in a state of continuous partial attention, constantly switching between tasks, thoughts, emotions, and stimuli. They've been trained to be mentally hyperactive, to fear silence, to fill every moment with input and distraction. They've been convinced that a quiet mind is a lazy mind, that constant mental activity equals productivity and intelligence. But the truth is more disturbing. Your scattered attention isn't a personal weakness. It's a strategic advantage for systems that need you to be manageable. A person who can focus deeply for extended periods becomes dangerous to systems built on distraction. A person who can sit in silence without discomfort becomes immune to manipulation through noise. A person who controls their own mental state becomes sovereign in ways that threaten every structure built on psychological dependency. The deeper you look, the more you realize that what you call your personality is mostly a collection of other people's psychological patterns. What you call your thoughts are mostly recycled ideas from sources you can't even remember. What you call your emotions are mostly conditioned responses to stimuli that were programmed into you before you could question them. This isn't philosophy. This is warfare, and the battlefield is your consciousness. But recognizing the invasion is just the beginning. Next, you have to see how deep it goes. The consequences of losing control over your mind aren't abstract. They're carved into your daily reality, written into your relationships, embedded in every decision you make. But you've been trained not to see them. You've been conditioned to accept a diminished existence as normal, to treat mental weakness as inevitable, to mistake psychological slavery for human nature. Here's what happens when your mind isn't yours. You become predictable. And predictable people get used, manipulated, and discarded by those who understand the game. While you're lost in mental fog, reacting to every stimulus like a trained animal, others are watching, calculating, positioning themselves to benefit from your psychological chaos. The confirmation bias becomes your master. Your scattered mind starts selecting only information that confirms what you already believe, creating an echo chamber so complete that you mistake your mental prison for the entire world. You stop learning, you stop growing, you stop questioning. Your thoughts become circular, repetitive, trapped in loops that generate the same problems, the same emotions, the same limited outcomes year after year. But it's worse than stagnation. Your uncontrolled mind becomes a weapon against yourself. The neurological pathways in your brain, designed to help you survive, get hijacked by modern stimuli that trigger ancient fear responses to non-existent threats. Your amygdala fires constantly, flooding your system with stress hormones that were meant for life or death situations, not for reading comments on social media or checking your bank balance. This chronic mental reactivity doesn't just exhaust you psychologically. It rewrites your neural architecture. Every time you react without thinking, every time you let your mind wander into worry or comparison or regret, you strengthen those mental pathways. Your brain becomes a highway system built for anxiety, distraction, and emotional instability. The more you use these routes, the more automatic they become, until mental chaos feels natural and mental control feels impossible. The attention economy understands this perfectly. They've studied your cognitive biases, mapped your psychological triggers, and designed systems that exploit your mental weaknesses for profit. Every social media platform uses intermittent reinforcement schedules, the same psychological mechanism that makes gambling addictive, to keep you checking, scrolling, reacting. They've turned your scattered attention into their revenue stream. But the real damage isn't external, it's internal. When you can't control your thoughts, you can't control your emotions. When you can't control your emotions, you can't control your actions. When you can't control your actions, you can't control your results. Your entire life becomes a series of reactions to circumstances you never chose, driven by impulses you don't understand, toward outcomes that don't serve you. Your relationships suffer because you can't stay present. Your mind is always somewhere else, replaying past conversations, imagining future scenarios, judging current moments against impossible standards. People feel your absence even when you're physically there. They sense your mental fragmentation and respond with their own defensive mechanisms. Connection becomes impossible when consciousness is scattered. Your creativity dies because creativity requires sustained focus, the ability to hold complex ideas in your mind long enough to develop them into something new. But your hijacked mind can't maintain focus. It jumps from thought to thought like a broken record, never staying with any idea long enough to transform it into insight or innovation. You become a consumer of other people's creativity instead of a creator of your own. Your decision-making becomes compromised by what psychologists call decision fatigue. When your mind is constantly processing unnecessary information, reacting to irrelevant stimuli, and generating pointless mental noise, you exhaust your cognitive resources. By the time you need to make important decisions, your mental capacity is depleted. You default to the easiest choice, the most familiar option, the path of least resistance. Your life becomes a series of default settings instead of deliberate choices. The cascade effect is devastating. Poor decisions create problematic circumstances, which generate mental stress, which further compromises your cognitive function, which leads to worse decisions. You enter a downward spiral where mental weakness creates life problems, and life problems reinforce mental weakness. Most people live their entire lives trapped in this cycle without ever recognizing the pattern. Your financial life reflects your mental state. Impulsive thoughts lead to impulsive purchases. Emotional reactions lead to poor investment decisions. Mental scattered attention leads to missed opportunities. The inability to delay gratification, to think long-term, to resist immediate impulses, keeps you trapped in financial mediocrity regardless of how much money you make. Your physical health deteriorates because chronic mental stress suppresses your immune system, disrupts your sleep patterns, and triggers inflammation throughout your body. The mind-body connection isn't metaphysical, it's neurological. When your thoughts are chaotic, your body reflects that chaos. Disease, fatigue, and physical decline become inevitable consequences of mental disorder. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is this: you stop believing that change is possible. Your scattered mind, having failed repeatedly to maintain focus, discipline, or consistency, convinces you that you're just not capable of mental control. You develop learned helplessness, the psychological condition where you stop trying to escape painful situations because past attempts have failed. This learned helplessness becomes your identity. You tell yourself you're just not a focused person, or you just have an anxious mind, or you just can't meditate. These aren't facts about your nature. They're stories your defeated mind tells itself to avoid the responsibility of taking control. They're psychological defense mechanisms that protect you from the terror of recognizing how much power you've surrendered. The cultural programming reinforces this helplessness. Society tells you that mental chaos is normal, that peace of mind is rare, that controlling your thoughts is either impossible or the domain of spiritual masters who've spent decades in meditation. This narrative serves the systems that profit from your mental weakness. but it destroys your belief in your own capacity for psychological sovereignty. You become what Nietzsche called the last man, someone who has given up the struggle for self-mastery and accepted a diminished existence as normal. You stop reaching for excellence because your mind can't sustain the focus required for mastery. You stop pursuing meaningful goals because your scattered attention can't maintain long-term vision. You stop believing in your potential because your uncontrolled mind provides constant evidence of your limitations. This is not your fault. This is not a personal weakness. This is the predictable result of living in a world designed to fragment your consciousness and profit from your mental confusion. But understanding the mechanism is the first step toward breaking free. Because once you see how mental control was stolen from you, you can begin the process of taking it back. The rebellion starts with a single recognition. Your mind doesn't have to be this way. What feels natural is actually learned. What seems impossible is actually inevitable once you understand the laws that govern consciousness itself. Everything they told you about controlling your mind is backwards. They taught you to fight your thoughts, to resist your emotions, to battle your mental patterns with willpower and positive thinking. But that's not control. That's mental warfare against yourself, and in that war, you always lose because you're fighting with the very mind you're trying to control. Real mental control doesn't come from fighting. It comes from understanding a principle they never taught you. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness that observes thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences emotions. You are not your mental patterns. You are the space in which mental patterns arise and dissolve. This distinction changes everything, because once you realize you are the observer, not the observed, you can step back from the mental chaos and watch it without being consumed by it. You can become the director of your inner experience instead of its victim. Marcus Aurelius understood this 2,000 years ago. In his private journal, he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But Aurelius wasn't talking about positive thinking or mental tricks. He was describing a fundamental shift in identity, from being the thoughts to being the thinker who chooses which thoughts deserve attention. The Stoics discovered something that modern psychology has forgotten. The mind is a tool, not an identity. When you mistake yourself for your thoughts, you become enslaved by them. But when you recognize yourself as the wielder of the tool, you can use it with precision instead of being used by it. But here's where it gets radical. Most spiritual traditions tell you to empty your mind, to stop thinking, to achieve some peaceful state of mental blankness. That's not control. That's mental abdication. True mental mastery isn't about having no thoughts. It's about thinking exactly what you choose to think, when you choose to think it, for as long as you choose to think it. Napoleon understood this. He trained his mind to focus completely on whatever problem required his attention, then switch that focus instantly to the next priority. He could spend hours in deep strategic thinking, then immediately shift to managing administrative details, then pivot to personal correspondence. His mind was a weapon he could point in any direction with surgical precision. The samurai had a concept called mushin, the mind without mind. But this wasn't emptiness. It was a state of complete mental availability, where consciousness wasn't trapped in any particular pattern but remained fluid, responsive, and under complete control. In combat, this mental state allowed them to respond instantly to threats without being slowed down by fear, hesitation, or mental noise. Here's the counterintuitive truth. You don't control your mind by restricting it. You control it by disciplining it. The difference is crucial. Restriction creates internal resistance. Discipline creates internal authority. Think of your mind like a powerful horse. If you try to control a horse by tying it up, beating it, or keeping it locked in a stable, you'll either break its spirit or create a rebellious, dangerous animal. But if you train the horse through consistent discipline, clear commands, and patient repetition, you create a partnership where enormous power serves your direction. Mental discipline starts with a practice they never taught you: deliberate thinking. Most people let thoughts arise randomly and then react to whatever shows up in their consciousness. That's not thinking, that's mental reactivity. Deliberate thinking means choosing your thoughts like you choose your clothes, selecting what serves your purpose, and discarding what doesn't. Start with 10 minutes a day. Choose a single topic, a problem you need to solve, a goal you want to achieve, a question you want to explore. Set a timer and think about nothing else. When your mind wanders, notice the wandering without judgment and return to your chosen topic. This isn't meditation. This is mental strength training. The resistance will be incredible. Your conditioned mind will generate every possible distraction. Urgent thoughts about things you need to do, memories that seem suddenly important, emotions that demand immediate attention, physical discomfort that feels unbearable. This resistance isn't your enemy. It's proof that you're breaking the conditioning. Ancient Greek philosophers had a practice called prososh, continuous attention to the present moment combined with careful examination of one's thoughts and judgments. They understood that mental freedom requires constant vigilance, not against external threats, but against internal conditioning that operates automatically below the threshold of awareness. But mental control isn't just about focused thinking. It's about emotional sovereignty. Your emotions aren't things that happen to you. They're responses you generate based on your interpretation of circumstances. When you realize that your emotional state is a choice, not always an easy choice, but always a choice, you reclaim power over your inner experience. Viktor Frankl demonstrated this in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. In the concentration camps, he discovered that between any stimulus and his response was a space, a moment of choice where he could decide how to interpret and respond to whatever was happening. Even when he couldn't control his external circumstances, he could control his internal response. This space between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. Most people have never noticed this space because they react so automatically that stimulus and response seem simultaneous. But with practice, you can expand this space, slow down your reactions, and choose your responses deliberately. The rebellion against mental slavery requires daily practice, but not the kind they taught you. You don't need hours of meditation or years of therapy. You need consistent, deliberate exercises that strengthen your capacity to choose your thoughts, direct your attention, and govern your emotional responses. Here's what real mental rebels do. They think on purpose. They feel on purpose. They direct their attention like a laser beam instead of a scattered flashlight. They become dangerous to systems that depend on scattered, reactive, emotionally unstable people because they can't be manipulated, distracted, or controlled. You don't negotiate with mental weakness. You don't accommodate mental chaos. You don't make peace with psychological slavery. You declare war on everything in your mind that isn't serving your highest purpose. And you fight that war with the precision of a surgeon and the determination of a warrior. The tools exist. The methods work. The only question is whether you're ready to stop being a victim of your own consciousness and start being its master. Because once you take control of your mind, everything else in your life becomes controllable too. Here's the truth they never wanted you to discover. Your mind isn't just a tool for survival. It isn't just a biological computer processing information. Your mind, when truly under your control, becomes a reality-shaping force so powerful that it threatens every system built on your psychological dependence. This is why mental control is so fiercely suppressed. This is why they convince you it's impossible, dangerous, or selfish. Because a human being who has achieved true mastery over their consciousness doesn't just think different thoughts. They create different realities. Every external condition in your life, your relationships, your finances, your health, your circumstances, is a reflection of your internal mental state, not because of some mystical law of attraction, but because your thoughts determine your actions determine your habits determine your character, and your character determines your destiny. When you control your thoughts with surgical precision, you control the entire chain of causation that creates your reality. The ancients understood this. In the Hermetic tradition, they taught, as above, so below. meaning the patterns of consciousness create the patterns of experience. The Buddhists discovered that suffering isn't caused by circumstances, but by the mind's relationship to circumstances. The Stoics realized that the same event can destroy one person and strengthen another, depending entirely on their mental discipline. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Your mind doesn't just respond to reality. It participates in creating reality through the mechanism of selective attention. Your consciousness acts like a filter, determining which aspects of infinite possibility you notice, engage with, and develop into actual experience. When your attention is scattered, you notice scattered opportunities and create scattered results. When your attention is focused, you notice focused opportunities and create focused results. When your attention is disciplined, you become capable of perceiving and actualizing possibilities that chaotic minds literally cannot see. This is why masters in any field seem to operate by different rules. They're not smarter or more talented than others. They've simply developed such precise control over their attention that they can perceive and act on subtle patterns, opportunities, and possibilities that remain invisible to undisciplined minds. This is why controlling your mind isn't just personal development. It's the most radical political act possible, because every system of control depends on keeping human consciousness fragmented, reactive, and externally directed. A person who has achieved true mental sovereignty can't be manipulated by advertising, controlled by fear, or enslaved by circumstances. They become a source of power instead of a consumer of power. The elite understand this. They spend fortunes on meditation retreats, consciousness training, and mental discipline practices, while promoting mental chaos and emotional reactivity to everyone else. They know that a population of mentally sovereign individuals would be impossible to control, impossible to exploit, impossible to keep trapped in systems that serve the few at the expense of the many. This is the final secret. Your mind is the last frontier of freedom. Every other aspect of human experience has been colonized, commodified, and controlled. But your consciousness remains unconquerable territory, if you're willing to fight for it. The battle isn't just for your attention, it's for your creative power. Because once you realize that disciplined consciousness shapes reality, once you understand that mental mastery translates into life mastery, once you experience the profound freedom that comes from being sovereign in your own mind, you become dangerous to everything that depends on your weakness. You stop being a consumer and become a creator. You stop being a victim and become a force. You stop being predictable and become ungovernable. You stop reacting to your circumstances and start generating circumstances that serve your highest purpose. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Mental sovereignty is earned through daily discipline, consistent practice, and relentless commitment to internal excellence. But once you taste true mental freedom, once you experience what it feels like to think exactly what you choose to think, feel exactly what you choose to feel, and direct your consciousness like a precision instrument, there's no going back to mental slavery. The question now isn't whether this is possible. History proves it's possible. The masters prove it's possible. Your deepest knowing proves it's possible. The question is whether you're ready to do what's necessary to claim your birthright, complete sovereignty over your own consciousness. Because in a world designed to fragment your mind, scatter your attention, and harvest your mental energy for others' profit, choosing to develop unbreakable mental discipline isn't just self-improvement. It's an act of rebellion. It's a declaration of independence. It's the most dangerous thing you can do to systems built on your psychological dependence. Your mind is yours. Your consciousness is yours. Your attention is yours. Your thoughts are yours. Your emotional responses are yours. Your inner experience is yours. Take it back. All of it, starting now. Because the world needs people who can think clearly, feel deeply, and act decisively in a time when mental chaos has become the norm and psychological slavery has become acceptable. You weren't born to be managed. You weren't born to be predictable. You weren't born to lease your consciousness to systems that profit from your confusion. You were born to be free. And that freedom starts in your mind. Comment this if you're ready to reclaim what was always yours. My mind is mine. My consciousness is sovereign. My thoughts serve my highest purpose. The revolution begins in your head. Everything else follows.